This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt, Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, you lined this one up. This is actually interesting. There's a very, not saying the other ones haven't been. What I mean here is that this is interesting on a different level. We're talking a lot about usually Lake Superior, water matters and things like that. Looking at mineral resources, geological surveys, and a lot more. Tell us a little bit about what you got lined up here.
Well, I have to admit that this all started because something really weird was flying along the shoreline.
Okay.
And I'm lucky enough to live next to Steve Beach, and he's my go-to guy about minerals. He is also a mineralogical engineer, and he said, well, yeah, they're mapping minerals. And I was like, wait. And he goes, you need to go to the site that tells you about the Earth MRI. Now, I've never had an MRI,
okay,
but I know a lot of people have.
Mm-hmm.
And we need somebody to explain to us right now how you have an MRI of the Earth.
Well, actually, to talk about that, here joining us on the podcast today is Jamey Jones. Jamey is a science coordinator with the Earth Mapping Resources Initiative with the U.S. Geological Survey Mineral Resources Program. That's a mouthful, but Jamey, welcome to the podcast, and tell us a little about this and what's going on. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Really happy to be here. Yeah, so there is a need to understand our nation's mineral resources, particularly things that we consider critical mineral resources today, things that we either haven't identified major sources of or have an essential use in national defense or technology. And so the USGS Mineral Resources Program in 2019 was given some new funding from Congress and a mandate to basically improve our mapping of the nation. And that takes on a few different forms, but the bottom line is the Earth Mapping Resources Initiative, or Earth MRI, is mapping the nation to better understand its mineral resource potential, among a host of other things that the data can be useful for.
What is it that you are doing to get this done? What are some of the approaches and techniques that you are using?
Yeah, this goes to Frida's observation. We're conducting airborne geophysical surveys is really one of our major activities around the country, and that's what was observed around the UP. And in fact, I think we still have some airplanes in the air flying over parts of the western UP. Those surveys involve measuring the natural magnetic field of the Earth, so that includes the bedrock that's exposed at the surface, and we can also sense signals that are maybe a few hundred meters to maybe a kilometer or so deep. The helicopter that's towing the big hoop is measuring, it's basically measuring the conductivity, the electrical structure of the shallow surface and subsurface. We're measuring natural radioactivity that's being emitted from minerals at the Earth's surface. All of these geophysical techniques can tell us about the rocks that are at or just below the surface, and then we can use geologic mapping that's being done by our state geological survey partners. We work with the Wisconsin, the Minnesota, the Michigan surveys to do geologic mapping there in the Lake Superior region. So we can put all this together into a series of maps that basically describe the geology of the region in ways and at a resolution that we just haven't ever had before. And whether they lead to new discoveries of mineral resources or not, we don't know, but we can't really know what's there until we map it.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Now let's drop back a little bit. You were saying helicopter and flying a big hoop. This must be kind of what Frida was referring to when you see something
right.
like this in the sky. But what is it? Describe it for someone on the ground, maybe who's never seen this. What will they see? What is it doing?
It's a really awkward bird, yeah. So there's a helicopter that's towing, I think the diameter of the hoop is like 100 feet or something. It's a pretty big piece of equipment. It's hanging about 100 feet below the helicopter, and it's all flying at a fairly low elevation. I think they fly like 150 or so feet off the ground, and we kind of mow the lawn, if you will. Yeah, and so what the hoop is doing, it's pretty cool. So the front of the hoop sends out a small electrical signal. That electrical signal interacts with minerals and rocks and sediments at the surface. And then there's a response that's generated and measured on the back of the hoop. And so we're basically sending out an electrical signal and measuring the return of that electrical signal. And what that tells us is if there are materials in the surface, shallow subsurface, that have different conductivity or resistivity signatures. And what we're particularly interested in the UP is graphite. Graphite is a really important mineral commodity. It's been produced historically in parts of the UP and there in western Michigan. There are a lot of rocks that have a lot of carbon in them. Whether that carbon is in the form of graphite, we're not sure, and we're not sure where, if it's graphite, it's concentrated. And so we're actually looking for patterns that show us where there might be more graphite in the surface or subsurface so that we can map it.
I am just like slack-jawed here. Like graphite? Really? I mean, my goodness, we have traditionally, copper and iron, and then, of course, lately it's been nickel, but graphite, what do you use that for?
Yeah, it's used for a lot of things, but importantly, it's used in battery anodes. And so in these modern high-storage batteries, you need graphite as a critical part of that technology, together with other things like lithium. But yeah, it's really important in high-capacity batteries these days.
You are talking a lot about this kind of tech. It seems to be like it's tied to our modern technology, our devices, everything from our phones to our EVs and the need for batteries. How much is that, no pun intended, driving this kind of research?
It's absolutely driving it almost 100%, because I think that all of the modern technologies that we rely on for our own comfort, our own safety, but also for, really important things like national defense, aerospace engineering, all of the high technology materials and the things that we've come to rely on, smartphones in particular, they have more and more complicated chemistries, and that requires more and more and more mineral resources. I don't remember the number of mineral commodities that go into a smartphone, but it's easily in the tens to, it's upwards of 30 or 40 perhaps. And so we need those commodities to make the world work the way we are used to it these days. And some of them are, I'm not going to say they're scarce, but they're tricky to find. So that's one of the challenges that we have to overcome by collecting good data.
Jamey, are we new to this game of mapping our resources? I mean, how is the rest of the world handling this?
Yeah, we're not new, but I think it's very clear that we're behind. There are other countries, like even if you just look across the border to the north, our neighbors in Canada, they have data sets that sort of set the modern standard decades ago. Like we're trying to catch up with Canada, we're trying to catch up with Australia. There are many developing nations, like in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, that actually have better geophysical data that we do here in the United States, in part because their geology is permissive for hosting things, and there are countries that have invested in that. So, we have a lot of good data in the United States, but what we recognize going into the Earth Mapping Resources Initiative is we just don't have enough high-quality data to really address these sorts of issues at the national level.
We're talking with Jamey Jones here today, science coordinator with the Earth Mapping Resources Initiative with the U.S. Geological Survey Mineral Resources Program. You've talked about around the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and working in sort of that Lake Superior region. What about the lake itself? I'm just curious, is this all just basically shoreline and land, or is there an ability for you to look into, I guess, what's below the surface of Lake Superior?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is really shoreline and land because the geology of the lake is very interesting, but it's also, what's the right word? It's not highly prospective for the things that we're looking for. It's really a bunch of basalt, similar to what you see on the North Shore or the South Shore. Of course, there's a tremendous history of copper associated with the Mid-Continent Rift, and the Mid-Continent Rift is the geologic structure that sort of underlies the lake. But from a mineral resources standpoint, separate from the copper legacy there in the UP, we're really looking for other things. And so, the lake is not a target. The lake isn't a target, really mostly for geologic reasons.
And I could see also that if there was something that was, let's say, identified, it might be a little bit more difficult to, in effect, go get it because of the depth of the water you're dealing with as opposed to being on the land and on the shoreline. It's interesting, Jamey, that you mentioned the copper legacy, right? And I grew up in that area known as the Copper Country, the Keweenaw Peninsula of Upper Michigan. And that was what drove that entire region because it was for industrial development. It was the need for copper for national security. This sounds very similar to it, but this is a really updated and new technology way of doing it. So it's maybe a new way of doing old tricks, right?
Oh, absolutely. No, critical minerals have been a feature of our sort of political dialogue for decades. I mean, going into World War II, for example, there was a need for antimony and other things, antimony, tungsten, et cetera. No, many of these commodities have been used widely, particularly in military applications. And the notion of criticality changes through time. It just happens that more of the periodic table is being used than ever before today. And so, this absolutely is. It's a cyclical thing, and we're in a particularly interesting and important cycle, given the technological advances that we've seen in the last generation.
Jamey, back in 1837, when Michigan became a state, one of the things that the governor did immediately was to send Douglas Houghton to Copper Harbor because he'd heard there was copper there and said, you've got to go out there and get that information. And they also knew that they had to map or, in essence, basically set the township and range lines. So William Austin Burt was one of the buddies of Douglas Houghton that got assigned to start, I believe, in St. Ignace and make his way. He couldn't work through the winter, obviously, but in the summer, he was out there mapping, and it took him from 1837 to 1844 just to get to Negaunee, Michigan, where he discovered iron ore. So I'm just using this as an example to say, how long is this mapping going to take?
Yeah, it's quite the effort. And I'll add to that story. My colleague Bill Cannon, who's been with the U.S. Geological Survey longer than I've been alive and has been mapping in the UP longer than I've been alive, and I'm no spring chicken, he's been systematically working across many parts of the western UP for most of his career, and it's hard going, especially when you're up on the shoreline. You have the advantage of sort of weathering and erosion. There's a lot more exposure. The further you come inland, you get into trees and grass and swamps and water, things that kind of cover up the rocks and make it more difficult to see them. The advantage that we have with the geophysical techniques is that we can cover a lot of ground really quickly. So, for example, the two surveys that we've talked about that have been operating in the UP, the helicopter survey is complete. We've already completed everything from, I think it goes from, it covers the entire UP from east to west, and that was done in, a matter of 3 or 4 months earlier this year. The airborne survey is going to take a little bit longer because it's a little bit tighter spacing on the lines. But we can cover the entire UP in the matter of a year with geophysical maps that give us the ability to see sort of through that vegetation, through the water a little bit, and make some regional observations. if we were to task the Michigan Geological Survey to go out and map the entire UP, that would take decades. It would be a generational effort. So this really does take time. And it also, even things that were mapped 100 years ago, we need to revisit them because we have new knowledge. We have better understanding of how things work. We have different techniques for analyzing minerals, doing things like geochronology. And so geology is always a bit of an iterative thing where we always need to take a fresh look at things that we think we know or thought we knew. But yeah, the geophysical survey coverage, I think, so right now we have a remarkable amount of funding from Congress. We got some major stimulus funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021. And so right now we have an additional $320 million. It's really helping us amplify the amount of work we can do and accelerate the pace of what we're doing. By the time the IIJA funding sunsets, which is the end of this current fiscal year, so in 2026, we're hoping to have about half of the country mapped using these high-precision techniques, focusing first on areas that are most prospective for these mineral resources we're interested in. So half of the country that's prospective, and we're looking at about maybe a third of the entire country considering all areas. So, we're making a pretty big dent in it, but we still have a ways to go before we can really say the job is done.
We're talking about the surveying here through the, Jamey Jones with us, the science coordinator with Earth Mapping Resources Initiative, U.S. Geological Survey Mineral Resources Program. Frida alluded to the timeline, and you talked about the timeline of taking it. And one of the factors with that in the olden days was winter weather and being able to get around and around Lake Superior and the Lake Superior region. Winter can throw a real wrench into a lot of plans. How does winter weather affect what you're doing with this program?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's about upon us, right? Certainly the geologic mappers go into hibernation. We don't do field geology as much in the winter, although it is easier to walk around on frozen swamps than it is wet ground. But no, the geologic mapping pretty much ceases, and what we do is we work on the rocks. We submit our samples for geochemistry, geochronology, all the follow-on activities that we need to do for the rocks that we've collected. The geophysical surveys, it varies a little bit. The helicopter-borne surveys that we were talking about, they actually prefer cold weather and snow on the ground because it kind of, I don't know, for some reason it kind of makes the signal more consistent when the ground is slightly frozen. So that's one of the reasons that helicopter survey started earlier in the spring there in the UP. The other survey, the fixed wing survey that's collecting magnetic and radiometric data, we need the ground to be snow-free because one of the sensors that we're using in that survey, it measures naturally emitted low-level radiation, and we want that radiation to be coming from the minerals at the surface. We don't want it to be obscured by water. It turns out water, frozen or liquid, actually absorbs those signals. And so we need the ground to be snow-free to collect those data. So that's why the fixed-wing aircraft survey, I don't think it started until about May when the ground was completely snow-free.
I got to tell you, Jamey, I'm listening here and my head is spinning. And, you first like to say, holy wow, right? Walt, I mean, holy wow. Jamey, how in the world did you land a job like this? You are brilliant.
I appreciate that. It's been a long and winding path. I went to college as an English major, but I quickly found geology as something that got me outside because we naturally like to go look at the rocks where they exist. And I don't know, for some reason it just clicked with my brain. So I got hooked on geology. I got hooked on doing field work. And so I'm in Anchorage, Alaska. I've been a geologic mapper here in Alaska with the USGS for the last 15 years. And it's been cool to move up into the sort of leadership components of the USGS because I think that we're doing really important work for the nation. We're collecting data that we've never seen as geoscientists sort of at this level in the United States. And so it's a really transformational time. So kind of being in the leadership team that helped makes it happen, creates the strategy, but also gets to come to the UP and look at rocks on occasion. It's just nothing like it. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and this also sounds like important work as you've described it, that it has obviously national security implications, but there's economic development implications with that, and a lot of other things. I guess if you could kind of define how important it is how important these minerals are when we talk about what you're looking at, especially like you were saying in today's world. How important are these to be able to know where they are?
I think it's essential. And, the question becomes, if we know there's opportunity and there's also concern, right? Because if you find something of value, then somebody's going to want to pull it out of the ground. But somebody might also say, well, why would we disturb that ground? And so I think really the important thing is if we get into a position where we need these minerals and we cannot get them from a trusted ally or a current trading partner, we need to be able to find them in the United States. And if the scenario allows for it to be developed, then we need to be able to develop him here in the nation and control the supply chains, which we really can't do. One of the reasons that we call many of these commodities critical is because we are dependent on imports, and those imports may be coming from adversarial nations, unreliable trading partners. And so the idea is that we have to know what we have so that we can make responsible decisions about those materials in the future as, the geopolitical and economic landscape evolves. And that's the important thing that I really want to emphasize here is that, we're not in the business of discovery. We're in the business of understanding. We're collecting data so that we can have a better understanding so that whatever decisions need to be made in the future, today, tomorrow, way off into the future, we're making them based on the best possible information. So I really want to underscore, all the data that we're collecting, we make publicly available so everybody can see what we're doing. We talk about it. Anytime anyone wants to know about what we're doing, we talk about it because we think the messaging is important. And when it comes time to make decisions about what we've discovered or what someone else has discovered with the data that we've collected, then we're all working from the same information and same good information. So I think that's really important.
Jamey, boy, oh boy, now you're giving me a headache. The information that you're getting. And, it's so important to understand 150 years ago, there was a landlooker here named J.M. Longyear. And one of the things that he did is he sold land, but he retained mineral rights. So you're looking at mineral rights that are not only on public lands, but private lands. So the impact this can have, you're saying that this information is open to the public, which we all get a little distrustful in the days of, artificial intelligence. Really, can we trust this information? How in the world are you keeping a feeding frenzy off from this information? Because the world needs these minerals. Is there a dynamic here that's also under the under the radar of what can come from this information?
That's a really important question, and it is something we're trying to be particularly mindful of. As the federal science agency, our lead mandate is to understand the mineral resource potential of federal lands, and so we try to emphasize data collection on federal lands so that the land management agencies, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, Park Service, whoever, can make decisions about those lands based on good information. So that's our primary role within the government. But of course, you're right. Geology doesn't respect boundaries. The rocks are where they are.
Yeah.
So I think one of the points that I would emphasize here is that, the private industry in the United States, particularly the mineral exploration mining industry, there are very few requirements for them to divulge the information that they collect, the data that they collect, to the public, because it is a competitive disadvantage for them. There are other countries that have mining laws that require all data to be turned over after some period of time if a company is working in an area or walks away. And so I think in the United States, we're working at a disadvantage. There are private explorers out there collecting data, much like what we're collecting for the government, and they're using that information to make decisions. That information is not necessarily available to other stakeholders, whether it's local communities, tribes, whoever might stand to be impacted by that work may not have the best information with which they can make decisions or perhaps push back in a particular scenario. And so I think there's more win than I think there's more upside than downside in having the information that we collect publicly available so that everyone who has a stake in whatever comes or wherever we're talking about can see the same information. And, we want to make sure that those who might be impacted know about those potential impacts, whether it's groundwater or, other issues in the area surrounding these, these geological prospects or potential mine sites. We're certainly sensitive to that, but we feel that there's greater value in having the information be publicly accessible so that everybody can derive their own conclusions, make their own choices, and influence the process to the extent that they can. Having information unequally available creates gaps in the dialogue, so we're trying to help close those gaps.
We're talking with Jamey Jones here on the podcast today, Science Coordinator, Earth Mapping Resources Initiative, U.S. Geological Survey, Mineral Resources Program. Now, you're talking about this information being available. People can find it publicly available. If somebody's listening to the podcast here and they're interested in this effort, they want to maybe see what you have found and what you have seen, how do they do that? Where can they get this information?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that we promote the most is we have what's called the Earth Mapping Resources or Initiative or Earth MRI Acquisitions Viewer. And so if one were to go on the internet and just Google USGS Earth MRI, the Acquisitions Viewer is one of the first things that would come up. And what that tool is, it's basically a map of the nation that shows all of our activities, past, present, doesn't include our future plans, but we update it as frequently as we can, mostly quarterly. What that website provides is, so for example, if you're sitting in Marquette and want to zoom in on the UP and see what kind of projects we have going on the UP, you'll see all of the different activities that we have funded in the past that might be ongoing. Each project will have a short description of the project. It'll talk about what types of data are being collected. Each project has a little bit of description of why we're doing the work, what sorts of mineral commodities are we interested in. Importantly, it talks about who's doing the work. So if it's a USGS person, there's a point of contact. So someone could reach out directly to them. Of course, I'm always a resource. If someone wants to reach out to me, I can either answer their question or put them in touch with somebody that is doing the work that could answer the question perhaps more intelligently. There's a point of contact. If the work has been completed, then you can actually click through and find the data. And of course, the data might not be intuitive to everyone. And so I would encourage folks to simply reach out to us. We talk to folks all the time with highly disparate skill and interest levels about the type of work that we're doing. And so if it's, I see this geologic map, what does it tell me? We can talk about that. I see these magnetic data, what do they tell me? We can talk about that. So I just really encourage folks to look at the Acquisitions Viewer, just poke around the area that they live in, the area that they're interested in, and reach out to us. Public outreach is a critical part of our mission. We want to make sure that the work that we're doing is of value, but it's also understood and appreciated by those who it might impact. So the Acquisitions Viewer is a great resource. The USGS website, of course, also has some information about Earth MRI in general. We have some graphics about kind of how we've come about. So I think just go on the web and Google USGS Earth MRI, and I think you'll find a lot of good starting points to dig in. But then to follow up, just reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you.
We're talking with Jamey Jones here today, Science Coordinator, Earth Mapping Resources Initiative, U.S. Geological Survey Mineral Resources Program. Again, that's a mouthful, but that means it covers a lot of different stuff. Jamey, you've given us some really good information here today. You mentioned, though, that the funding goes through next fiscal year, 2026. Is there certain things or what's ahead in the next year, especially here, maybe in the Lake Superior region with the efforts?
Yeah, so We have the supplemental funding that will be coming to a close at the end of this fiscal year. Thankfully, we also have a sort of a firm funding foundation, so the work will continue just at a slightly different pace and a slightly different scale. One of the things that we're excited about this year is that we're doing in fact, the survey might be in the air right now. Once the aircraft So we have a big survey happening in northeastern Minnesota, right there around the Duluth complex, the Duluth area, extending down almost to the northern part of the Twin Cities. That continues on from a survey that we did a little further west in the state over the Cuyuna Range, some of the Iron Ranges there. So we're We're doing a lot of new work in eastern Minnesota that kind of bridges across to the work that we've been focused on there in the UP of northern Michigan. So that's something that we're really excited about. Our state geological survey partners throughout that entire region are really talented at doing the geologic mapping. We've got major campaigns to collect some really interesting and important data. The last thing I'll mention is we've had some really cool engagements with tribes in the region. We're working with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community there in northern Michigan. We're working with a couple of tribes over in eastern Minnesota with really the intent of helping tune our data collection to perhaps address and support tribal concerns, groundwater being one of the important ones. So we've also got some really cool engagement with tribes in the Lake Superior region that's really helping us take our data and cast it into a slightly different light and use it for some different purposes, which I think is really enriching the sort of broader landscape of the work we're doing. So, yeah, there's so much happening, and the efforts are widespread right now. They will be less widespread in the future, but they are going to continue. And so you'll continue to hear from us for many years to come.
All right, Jamey, thank you very much. We appreciate all the info.
Thank you.
That's Jamey Jones. He's science coordinator with the Earth Mapping Resources Initiative with the U.S. Geological Survey Mineral Resources Program. There will be a test on that later. But, boy, and talk about some info. I mean, it's really cool because, like I mentioned to him, I grew up in the Copper Country area. That's the Keweenaw Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in Lake Superior. Copper mining was what built that entire region, and there was many reasons for that copper to be used. It was for industrial development. It was for national security. It was for wiring electrical programs in around the country. And it's kind of the same thing, but it's just using modern technology because our modern technology needs what they're looking for. I think that at least from my perspective, Jamey and the crew in this effort is to identify what's there. It's not then to decide what to do with it. It's to have that information when there is something to perhaps be looked at. So I think that's an important consideration. Somebody listening to the podcast here, if they want to contact them. But, it's really been an interesting conversation. Another thing that's going on around the Big Blue, around Lake Superior. And by the way, if there's an idea or something that you'd like us to talk about, you can find Frida and I and the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation through the website and just Google that. You can just, NPLS. However you want to do it, wherever you get this podcast from, you can also get some information to you on that. We'd love to hear from you because we're always looking for ideas here on the podcast. But it's pretty much going to do it for us this time around. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.